Well, good evening, councillors, officers and members of the public of two. Welcome to this evening's meeting of Corporate Scrutiny. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel. And I welcome those viewers who are out there watching this first meeting of this term of the Council Corporate Scrutiny Committee. For members in the room, can I request that mobile phones are either set to silent or switched off? And I also make the point to the community that we are paperless, so we will be looking at our laptops throughout the meeting, but that is all in the line of the things that we need to read our papers on screen. If you'd like to speak, I'd like to introduce you by name and invite you to address the meeting at the appropriate time, but I don't believe we do have any speakers coming forward. We'll now move to apologies received for absence.
We've received apologies from Councillors Chris Kellett and Bill McElhenney, and Councillor Helen Harrison is in attendance as a substitute. Thank you.
And one thing I would like to do, as it is the first meeting that we are holding of this Corporate Scrutiny Committee, is I would just like to go around the table and in a couple of minutes just to introduce everybody. For councillors, if you could introduce yourself by name and the ward that you're in, and if the ward name isn't completely obvious, just roughly where that is. But I'd like to start as we go around the table with Raj.
I'm Raj Sohar. I'm the Scrutiny Officer supporting Corporate Scrutiny.
I'm Scott Brown, Councillor representing the Earls-Barton ward, which covers Earls-Barton up to Isham and all the villages in between.
Thank you, Scott.
Councillor Helen Harrison. Is it not? Sorry.
It is now.
Councillor Helen Harrison. I represent Oundle ward, which is the town of Oundle plus another 24 villages. It goes all the way to Easton on the Hill and starts pretty much parallel with the bottom of Oundle, so it's quite big.
Thank you.
I'm Councillor Dennis McLean. I represent Piper Hill ward in Kettering.
I'm Councillor Jonathan Carvetta and I represent the Brickhill and Queensway ward in Wellingborough.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Chris Stevenson. I'm the Scrutiny Manager.
Good evening, my name's Tom Barden. I'm the Head of Performance, Intelligence and Partnerships.
Good evening, I'm Mark Dickinson, Assistant Director of Finance and Strategy.
Good evening, I'm Claire Edwards, the Executive Director for Finance.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Martin Griffiths. I represent the Croyland and Swanspool division of in Wellingborough, and I'm also the leader of North Northamptonshire Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Graham Cheatley from the Kingswood ward in Corby, and I'm also the member for Finance, Efficiency and Change.
Good evening, Guy Holloway, Assistant Chief Executive.
Hi, I'm Jane Buffet. I'm Director of Public Health, Communities and Leisure.
Good evening, I'm David Watts. I'm the Executive Director for Adults, Health Partnerships and Housing.
Good evening, I'm Ben Jameson, Councillor for the Eyes ward in Kettering.
I'm Paul Brook and I am Councillor for Hatton Park, Wellingborough. That's it really. That's all you need to know.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, colleagues. And one of the things, certainly for people listening at home, do make sure that the microphone is close to you. I listen to these broadcasts when I'm not on a meeting, and sometimes variable sound isn't so great. So, item number 3, declarations of interest. Members, would you confirm that you're coming to the meeting with an open mind and have not predetermined any of the items? A general nodding and agreement is fine. General nodding and agreement. Do you have any declarations, members, to add to any that you have already declared? Consensus there now. When declaring an interest, if one should come up, we would ask you to identify the item number when it comes along, that you have an interest, the nature of that interest, if you do have one, and whether the interest is a disclosable pecuniary interest or a non-registrable interest. So that's just keeping everything clear with any interests that we may have. So item number 4 is minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of February 2025. Since I believe only Councillor Scott Brown was the only councillor who was there then and is there now at the previous meeting, we're saying here we cannot approve the minutes, or we note them. We can with Scott here. So I'd like to seek a proposer, which I'm sure would be Scott, and a seconder for those minutes to be approved. Thank you. Well, Councillor Dennis McLean. So we're under, by law, we're obliged to keep an accurate record of meetings, and that is exactly what we've just done. So item number 5 on our agenda is over to Raj to introduce the item and an overview of what this Corporate Scrutiny Committee is all about. Raj.
Yep, so good evening everyone and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee. As I said, my name is Raj Sohal. I'm the Scrutiny Officer for the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, and I just want to take a few minutes at the start of the meeting tonight to welcome you all and give a brief overview of what it is this committee does and why our work matters. So after the local elections in May, a new group of 9 members was appointed to the committee by annual council on the 22nd of May. So you're now part of a key group responsible for overseeing how the council manages its corporate responsibilities, and that includes things like budgets, performance, and customer services. The council operates under an executive model of governance. That means decision-making powers lie largely with the executive, but we are required under the Local Government Act 2000 to have scrutiny committees in place to hold the executive to account. So what does that mean in practice for us? Well, scrutiny doesn't make decisions, but it can influence them. Our job is to examine decisions that have been made or are being proposed, ask questions, review evidence, and make recommendations where necessary. We play a critical role in making sure decisions are based on sound evidence, good process, and represent good value for money. Now, when it comes to the Corporate Scrutiny Committee specifically, we have quite a wide-ranging remit. We're responsible for reviewing and scrutinising the Council's revenue budget, capital programme, and housing revenue account. That includes reviewing budget proposals and making sure they're subject to rigorous challenge, not just rubber stamping them. Beyond finance, we also look at corporate performance, how council buildings and other resources are managed, and enabling services like IT, and we have oversight of things like customer services, complaints, and our work with outside bodies and partnerships. So there's a lot of scope here for members to really make an impact. Of course, we don't work in isolation, so since May this year, the Council has 4 scrutiny committees, including a newly established one focused on children, young people and education. There's also a Scrutiny Management Board, which helps coordinate and oversee all scrutiny activity across the Council, but this committee, Corporate Scrutiny, is really at the heart of holding the organisation to account for how it runs and how it performs. And that brings me to the final point I want to make tonight, which is about your role. So scrutiny works when members are engaged, curious and well informed. We'll be supporting you with training, briefings and background information to help build your confidence and make sure you're equipped to challenge and contribute effectively. Good scrutiny helps deliver better outcomes for residents, and it's about shining a light on what's working, identifying what's not, and helping the council to improve. So thank you again for being here tonight and stepping into this important role. I look forward to supporting the committee in the months ahead, and I'm always happy to help with any questions or information you might need. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj, for that overview. If there are any questions from colleagues at this stage, by all means ask. Otherwise, we will move on to agenda item 5. And this is really our opportunity to ask Claire Edwards, our Director of Finance, Leader of the Council, Martin Griffiths, and Finance Portfolio Holder, Graham Cheatley, have all come along, which is by my request, because the scrutiny that we're going to be doing over this next 12 months, and indeed in the future years, needs to be effective and focused on what the executive is hoping to achieve for its budget in this next 12 months, and very much would like to feel that we are being directed by yourselves with those areas that we need to scrutinise and add value to your executive meetings. So I'll hand over to Claire, a little bit of background, and then we'll perhaps have some questions from members.
Thank you, Chair. So part of scrutiny that will play in the budget setting process will help us to understand the budget proposals that as the administration will be putting forward in their consultation process that happens during this next 6 months. So what we'll be looking to do is working with you as that critical friend to challenge, understand and really sort of help us develop what that budget proposal may look like. These will obviously be budget proposals that will be put forward as part of the executive's budget that will go to full council in February and also set our council tax. So what we will be bringing back here in terms of a budget timetable, we'll be working to try and pull it forward as much as we possibly can to ensure that we have scrutiny's engagement in that process in terms of pre-scrutiny, in terms of prior to setting the draft budget rather than after the draft budget. This is all subject to ensuring that some of the government timelines are still kept on track. So we're still working on a fair funding consultation, which is due back on the 15th of August, and the outcome of that we're hoping will be delivered back to us by November. So those timelines notwithstanding, we're hoping that a lot of the work we'll be able to do between now and the end of September in terms of looking at and putting together our detailed budget plans, again with a transformation plan, in working in partnership with the executive, and also then be able to work with the scrutiny to develop those budget proposals in October and November, with the view that they then go into the draft position of the budget, and then that goes out to consultation once approved by executive. So that's sort of a bit of a snapshot in terms of the timeline that we'll be looking to work to. So it might be slightly different to what we may have seen before, and we're really trying to sort of make sure we can work in unison with scrutiny to make sure that process is rather seamless. So we will be putting a more detailed budget timeline together to ensure that that can be delivered and what that might look like. So I'm happy to pause there and take any questions, and then I can also invite the leader, Martin, to say a few words, and Graham as well. But I'm happy to take any questions.
So colleagues, any initial questions for Claire and that introduction? Before we go to Martin, I can say that our job is to scrutinise the budget, and by the marvels of computers, I can tell you that the council in this room on February the 19th, 2026 will set the council tax for our residents, and that is exactly 204 days, 5 hours, 47 minutes and 21 seconds away. So we have 200 days to use the value that we have and the number of meetings that we have to be able to scrutinise and be driven to that scrutiny by the executive and to look back in time as well, as Claire has said. So 204 days, leader, Martin Griffiths. Yep.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you to the Chair, Councillor Jim Hakewell, for inviting me to say a few words this evening. I see the influence and challenge that this scrutiny committee and the other scrutiny arrangements that the Council have as being vital to the effective policy and decision-making of this Council. Although scrutiny committees are not decision-making bodies, when done properly, they can play a vital role in influencing policy development and the decisions made by the executive and the council. However, it is important for scrutiny to have input into the relevant policies and decisions before the policy is approved or decision made, and I'm sure the committee will have a view about those areas and as they are equally as important as we move forward. Scrutiny after the event is also very important too, but scrutiny should be much more than a performance monitoring tool. I'm also delighted that the Corporate Scrutiny Committee has such an experienced chair. I know there will be times when I may not feel that way, when really difficult questions are being asked. But joking aside, that is part of what scrutiny is all about. Jim has a wealth of experience at district, county and unity authorities and in life, and I hope you don't take that the wrong way. He also has a lot of experience in the role of scrutiny and executive members, and I recognise both the importance and value that effective scrutiny can add. I think as a final note, I know that this committee has a mix of mostly new members, but some experienced ones. I think that is great to see, and I'm sure together, guided by your chair, you will add significant value to the work of this council. I look forward to viewing more of these meetings in the future, hearing what you have to say and taking on board your valuable insight and feedback. As leader of this council, I will always endeavour to present papers with meaningful recommendations that put the interests of our residents first and deliver the very best for the council taxpayers that we are all privileged to represent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Cheatley, would you like to contribute at this point as well, please?
Yeah, I'd also like to reiterate thanks for the opportunity to attend the scrutiny tonight, your first one. As the newly appointed Executive Member for Finance, Efficiency and Change, I wanted to place on record my support and respect for the vital work that this committee will do moving forward, and for the work it's going to be doing for all the residents of North Northamptonshire. I also fully acknowledge the essential role of scrutiny within our council's governance framework. An effective scrutiny rooted in cross-party collaboration is fundamental to maintaining public confidence, enhancing transparency and ensuring robust decision-making at all levels of our authority. As Executive Member, I welcome and embrace your role in holding both the Executive and me, in actual fact, personally, to account. Constructive challenge, when conducted openly and fairly, makes our decisions stronger and our outcomes better. We're operating in an exceptionally challenging financial climate, which we'll come on to soon, with sustained pressures across core services, including adult social care, children's services, special educational needs and disabilities, home-to-school transport and the dedicated schools grant. Inflationary impacts, rising demand and constrained national funding have significantly tightened our financial margins. But despite these challenges, we remain absolutely committed to delivering a legally balanced budget, safeguarding frontline services and ensuring long-term financial sustainability for North Northamptonshire Council. And I want the committee to know that I will work with openness and integrity, ensuring that you are equipped with the necessary financial information, context and insight to undertake your responsibilities effectively. I welcome your questions, your recommendations and your scrutiny. I see scrutiny, a bit like what Martin's already said, as not an obstacle but as a partner in our shared mission to improve the lives of residents, to use public money wisely and to build a more transparent, resilient and responsive local authority. So I look forward to working with you all, and outside of this committee meeting, if you've got any questions that you want answering, feel free to email me and I'll try and get those answers for you. Thank you.
Graham, thank you, Councillor Cheatley. Colleagues, any questions about our journey as we're setting off today? Any questions for our colleagues, particularly Martin and Graham? Councillor Harrison, Helen Harrison.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Claire, Martin and Graham, for your opening remarks. They were very interesting. Good to hear your thoughts on the process that we're going to be going through over the next few months. I just wanted to ask a question about, I think, the very tight timelines there are for building a budget. I mean, I've been through it myself. I know how tight it is. Every year it seems to get tighter and tighter, particularly with government deadlines, which never seem to quite come where they're supposed to. And as well as that, thrown into the mix is the efficiency review that the leader brought forward a couple of months ago. Which I think has got to be very important, a really important part in all of this. So I just wonder if you could maybe just give us a quick update on how the efficiency review is going, because when it was announced, I think there was a lot of work still to be done behind the scenes with looking at the scope of it, how it was going to work, what it was going to be looking at, and so on. And I think if the efficiency review is going to work, it's going to have to dovetail very much into this whole process. So I'd be really interested to hear a bit more about how that's going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
So thank you, Chair. So just to sort of give you a bit of an update, we are exactly doing as you've described. So whilst we are doing a efficiency review, we're using it as an opportunity to also review our detailed budget process. So it will be fairly intense and at pace. And it's sort of giving us an opportunity to not only look at the actual spend, so we have now that historical data that we can look at and analyse and formulate what we've done and where we're going and what we need to focus on in terms of that historical activity, but also whether that can inform and challenge what the current budget position actually is. So there's going to be a twin track process where we're going to be looking at the detailed budget, sort of line by line, to give us that sort of initial review of efficiency savings that we can really sort of start to focus on, sort of the service level improvement functions, and together overlaying that with a transformation plan in terms of working through sort of large scale invest to save types of proposals, which will then come to this very committee in terms of looking at what they will deliver, in terms of the outcomes that we want to achieve, whilst obviously still trying to look and move within the framework of being financially sustainable. So we're trying to do that very quickly. We don't want to spend too long doing this because you can get bogged down, I think, too much in the sort of processes type stuff. So this will really be a quick process from start to finish. So we're trying to utilise sort of August and September to get all of that work done, having touch points that we need to bring back to the executive working group, and has put together sort of a really more robust timeline in terms of what that looks like and what we need to deliver from it and what sort of outcomes we're seeing. So again, it's trying to ensure that we've got the really sort of budget manager level sort of input, sort of what we're seeing day to day and what we can improve from that efficiency review, and some quick wins that we can sort of look at. And I think this has probably been, you know, the first opportunity that we've been able to sort of do this in the sort of landscape that we've had in terms of looking and moving into being one authority, and really sort of setting that out in terms of making sure all those budgets are aligned properly and they're all in the respective budgets and places that they need to be. So I think that's one angle, and the other angle is obviously looking at a really big transformation plan. As you've just heard, we are and do have significant financial pressures, as you'll be not surprised to know, around obviously the demand-led services, and that's still going to be our main focus in terms of those transformational activities.
Thank you, colleagues. Any other colleagues want to address questions to Claire, the leader, and Councillor Martin Griffiths?
Thank you, Chair. And just to come back on those comments about efficiencies, I applaud the administration for the last 4 years in making £90 million worth of efficiency savings. Thank goodness that was the case. But I see this committee as helping us deliver those efficiencies as we move forward, because we've got to carry on doing it. The reason we've got to carry on doing it is because we need to make sure we deliver the very best for our statutory services, but also do the very best to protect our non-statutory services that we know our residents really, really value. So that's why I see this committee, this scrutiny committee, being vital to actually to delivering those efficiencies as we carry forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Any other questions from the floor? My only question there is the efficiency review. How do you anticipate that will come back to us? Let's assume August and September for doing that work. And I warm to the fact that, you know, sometimes in scrutiny we can dwell on very small sums and have very elongated debates. So I welcome the fact line by line isn't getting into too minutiae. But how would this committee receive back the response from the efficiency review? And I would guess we would need to pick that up from the executive working group and make it sustainable into the future.
Yes, that's exactly as I anticipate it to be working. So one of the big focuses that we'll be looking at while we are doing the detailed review, what we're expecting or anticipating to come back to you as a scrutiny group will be those in form of budget proposals. So again, what we'll be presenting to you will be in form of something slightly different to what we've done before, rather than focusing on essentially what may be directorate sort of led discussions. You know, I really want to sort of turn it around and have that sort of different conversation around the corporate view, which obviously cuts across the whole organisation. So we're looking at it not just in an isolation format, but we're looking at it across the whole organisation in terms of those proposals and focusing on the outcomes and input, you know, what they are trying to achieve in terms of delivering a balanced budget and trying to get over the deficit that we are facing currently, and hopefully trying to present a balanced budget. So whilst all the detailed work will be there, it will be presented to you in terms of business cases and proposals. So there might be some low-level stuff up to some really big, probably invest-to-save types of proposals in terms of obviously demonstrating to you, you know, if we were to do that, then this will have this impact on the budget. So you can start to see the total impact rather than just being isolated in just having a conversation around adult social care or just a conversation around children's. So I really want to make sure that you as a group have the corporate view rather than that sort of pocketed view just by directorate. So we're trying to sort of do something slightly different in that space, but hopefully it'll give you a much more wider view of the whole picture rather than just sort of different parts of the conversation and bringing it together as one. So it might be more around sort of business case reviews, but also seeing the investment that we'll have to make for the outcome that we want to achieve. And then you'll be able to sort of value whether that's a good proposal to go for or not, and to make that recommendation then to the executive in terms of supporting that in the budget arena. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Another question from myself. I'm looking around for any other questions coming from the floor. One of the things I know, Martin, that we've talked of in the past is engaging the community in the budgeting process. We know that there are finite things that we can or can't do, but do you have any particular views on how we can engage our community and make sure that they know the good news and sometimes the bad news, but we're actually engaging with them more so perhaps than we have in the past? If you have any views on that, Martin or Graham.
Only to say that we've just engaged in one of the biggest consultations with the people of Northamptonshire by way of the resident satisfaction survey, and I'm sure you may well be looking at the results of that as those results come forward and as we create our corporate plan. It is quite difficult to engage with members of the public in this format, but we will have a look at that going forward and come back to the committee in due course.
Thank you. Well, thank you. You are both, Martin and Graham, welcome to stay and listen to our continuing debate. But I don't see any other councillors wishing to ask questions directly of you.
Councillor, Chair, I've been here nearly 12 hours now, so if you don't mind, I'll probably leave you to it and then watch this on playback subsequently, if that's okay with members.
Yeah. To be fair, we're looking at the reports you looked at on June the 17th, so it would be a bit déjà vu.
Thank you ever so much. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming along this evening and talking to us and listening to us. So, good night. So, item number 6 on our agenda is the budget forecast draft outturn for 24-25 period 12, an attractive title, no less. So we're now handing over to Claire to give us your background and your dialogue around the budget forecast that ended our 24-25 year budget.
Thank you. I'll just say a few words, but I will hand over to my colleague, Mark Dickinson, who will take you through the report. I'm pleased to present this report to this committee. We have seen some significant financial challenges during this financial year, which as a corporate leadership team, we have been able to mitigate some of these challenges and really sort of focus on what it is that we're trying to deliver and really focus on those outcomes that we're getting for our residents. So some of the issues and challenges that we've seen are in the report, and some of the issues that we're trying to deal with and what we're trying to do to sort of circumnavigate some of those issues. Again, they're not unique to Northamptonshire. This is an issue that we're seeing right across the whole of local government in terms of those challenges that we face around increased demand levels, increased pressures within schools and children's services alike. So whilst we do have an overspend, what I would say to you that this is actually quite a significant challenge that we've seen. We did start the year at just declaring an overspend of just over about £15 million, and we're now declaring an overspend of 400,000. So you can sort of see the sort of work that's gone in to help the service of North Northamptonshire deliver pretty much a balanced position. So I'm really proud to see that this result's coming to you today, but no less, do not be deterred. There is significant amount of work for us still to do in this space, which I'm sure Scrutiny will be more than happy to help us look at. So I'll hand over to my colleague Mark, who'll take you through the report.
Thanks very much, Claire. So this report provides commentary on the Council's draft revenue outturn position for 24-25, and this was reported to the Executive at the meeting on the 17th of June. Within the report itself, there is actually an executive summary in section 2, which outlines the main variances, but I'll talk on a few of those. As Claire said, the General Fund draft outturn is an overspend of 400,000. This is against a net budget of 378.8 million, so it results in a variance of around 0.1%. The main pressures, as Claire's alluded to, are largely across the demand-led services. There's been pressures within the Children's Trust. The contract sum for the Children's Trust for last year was 183.3 million, and the Trust had a total pressure of 15.9 million. The Trust itself provides the services to the North and West Councils. The main pressures within the Trust relate to placement costs. They amounted to 10.9 million, and there was pressures on staffing costs of 2.8 million. NNC share of this amounted to 7.1 million. This was able to be reduced by 560,000, which reflected the use of reserves for one-off investments, which resulted in an overall net pressure of £6.5 million. There was also a net pressure of 5.9 million in adult social care. There was pressures of 13.7 million, predominantly in relation to third-party payments for independent care spend. And these pressures were partially offset by additional grant and client contributions of 7.8 million. There were savings across the General Fund. The main ones related to additional investment income, and that amounted to 2.4 million, and this reflected the higher Bank of England base rate compared to budget, and it was based on an average cash balance of 201 million at a weighted average rate of 5.29% for the full year. There was also savings in the minimum revenue provision, and this reflects the minimum amount a council must charge to the revenue budget each year to set aside a provision for repaying borrowing. The budget for 24-25 was 9.8 million, and the provision, which is aligned to the MRP policy, amounted to just over 4 million, resulting in a saving of 5.8 million. The Council's corporate contingency budget for 24-25 was 4.1 million, and that was around about 1% of the net budget. The contingency budget is held to meet unknown or unplanned unbudgeted costs. The unused balance on the contingency budget at the end of the year was 3.8 million. In terms of the housing revenue account, this is a separate ring-fenced account within the Council for the income and expenditure associated with its housing stock. The HRA does not directly impact on the Council's wider general fund budget or on the level of council tax. Income to the HRA is primarily received through the rents and other charges paid by tenants and leaseholders. And the Council's draft outturn for the HRA is an underspend of 523,000 against the approved budget of 42.4 million. In terms of the dedicated schools grant, this is a ring-fence grant allocated to local authorities by the government to support a range of education-related services. The original DSG budget for 24-25 had a budget deficit of 7.7 million. The draft outturn is a pressure of 6.8, resulting in an overall deficit of 14.5 million. Further details are set out in section 7 of the report, but the pressures that we see across the high needs block are a national issue, and the majority of councils now have a deficit on the DSG, and this is largely as a result of the increase in the number of educational health and care plans. The audit of the 24-25 accounts will take place during the summer, and the draft outturn will also be subject to review by external audit, and I'm happy to take any questions through you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that overview of what is a large number of pages and a large number of paragraphs. And I think as we go through this year, and looking across at Tom Barden as well, trying to make this a manageable report for ourselves, given that the executive received this report and there's 10 executive members and they all take their own slices of it. Obviously, as a corporate scrutiny committee, it's hard for us to cover all of those bases in that way. But hopefully we can work through some ideas to make it more meaningful to us and indeed more meaningful to the community. So colleagues, any questions coming forward? Councillor Scott Brown.
Thank you very much. My question is regarding the general fund overspend. I won't question you on the 400k general fund overspend because, as you've mentioned, that is a very small amount. So it's a good result, really, I think, all things considered. But how were the pressures managed in year to limit this figure? And what can we do going forward to make sure the lessons learned are taken into this new budget?
I think in terms of the overall spend of 400,000, as I said earlier, a lot of the pressures were through those demand-led services. The bits that's been able to offset those was the additional investment income, the change in MRP policy, and the combination of those have culminated in an overall pressure of £400,000. That £400,000 itself will be funded by drawing down on reserves to get to that balanced position for 24-25. In terms of learning, we're always wanting to use the latest intelligence that we've got available, which is the 24-25 outturn data. And when we look at doing the budget process for subsequent years, we'll be using the 25-26 budget as a starting point, but that will be overlaid by any additional pressures that we may have had during the previous year, i.e. 24-25. 25-26, when we're doing the monitoring, we're currently in the process of that for Q1. That will also highlight any further pressures and potential savings. And we'll be looking to bring those into the 26-27 budget and then extrapolate that forward into future years. So it's always trying to use that latest data set that we've got available to us to make those informed decisions in terms of how we set the budget for future years.
Thank you. Scott, your question. And any other questions from colleagues around the room? Ben Jameson, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. How has the outturn position affected the Council's general fund balance and earmarked reserves position at year end?
I think in terms of in the report itself, it highlights, as I said earlier, around the £400,000, which is a pressure that we've had to fund. When we set the budget, we anticipate a use of reserves to support some of that spend, and the strategy we've used here in using reserves is that reserves will only be used to support one-off costs. We don't look to use reserves to support ongoing revenue costs because it's not sustainable. Within the report, it highlights a number of transfers that we've made to and from reserves as part of that close down process, and they're set out within the recommendations of the report that went to the executive. So there was transfers to reserves of 4.9 million and transfers back from reserves of 1.5 million.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mark. Councillor Harrison, Helen.
Thank you. So just thinking about the future and the pressures in particular in adult social care. One thing that I note from the report, and this seems to be a recurring theme year after year, is that we're looking at very large overspends and then grants come forward. I'm assuming this was from central government, I'm not sure. But I know that in past years, grants have come and sometimes we've definitely been expecting them. We've not necessarily known how much we're going to get. So I'm just asking about this year, the grant that did come through, which obviously helped hugely, was that known and kind of, it obviously wasn't budgeted for, but was it considered to be something that would be coming forward and therefore taken into account? And are we likely to have a better understanding of what money is going to come from government in the form of grants for adult social care in order to be able to not have the peaks and troughs and frankly the worry that I'm sure our officers have in the adult social care world? If I hope that made sense.
I guess in terms of grants going forward, there's a key consultation out at the moment in terms of the fair funding review. As Claire alluded to, it closes on the 15th of August. What government are wanting to do is simplify the system. What happens at the moment, we receive numerous grants, and what they're wanting to do is roll that all into one, in essence, which would simplify it. What we've got to make sure is that there is still transparency around how grants are being allocated to individual authorities. I think you're absolutely right in terms of the pressures that we do face. We're not unique in those pressures. It's one that is well recognised up and down the country. A lot of what we're seeing is changing demographics, particularly, and David will come on to some of this no doubt, but we're seeing an ageing population. Good news is they're living longer, but they require, in some instances, care for a longer period of time. And that's a cost that is then borne by us as the local authority. What David and colleagues are constantly working on is looking at how we can deliver those services more efficiently and more effectively and trying to drive down that cost and looking at options for how they do that. I think David will elaborate a little bit more around that.
Thank you. David Watts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for that explanation. And thank you, Councillor Harrison, for the question as well. I think it is fair to say that actually it still remains quite unpredictable about the sorts of grants that we will get and when we will get them. If you look at some of the challenges which are being faced by central government across the piece, the requirements for the NHS, particularly NHS England, to reduce their expenditure by 40%, gives you an indication of some of the challenges being faced in that. I think it's fair to say that for those of us that are a bit long in the tooth, and I count myself in that number now, is that we're used to working in austere times. And we don't rely on government coming forward with grants, so we are always looking for different ways of being more efficient in the work that we do. A number of those pieces of work you will be familiar with because we worked on those with you and the previous administration. But it's fair to say that from our position, we're finding that those easy things to find are a lot more difficult, and we're having to consider much bolder proposals that will require us as a local authority to potentially take more risks about some investments that deliver over the medium to longer term. And those are some of the things that we will be looking at during budget setting, and we'll be happy to talk to you about throughout that process moving forward. However, that does include things like efficiencies within our workforce, looking at how we use technology to deliver some of our services better, but could also mean some significant capital investments to help deliver different sorts of accommodation that enable us to provide care cheaper, but to an equally good quality to the current arrangements that we have.
Thank you, David. Helen, yes, by all means, come back.
Thank you, and absolutely, I completely acknowledge the great work that you and your team do, David, because you have had, you have found savings and efficiencies year in, year out, and yet the demand doesn't cease, it doesn't let up. So can I just clarify, Mark, you were talking about the fair funding formula, I think that's what you call it, fair funding formula. If that all comes, to fruition and we have a fair funding formula, is that going to help adult social care? Are we going to have certainty in the future, or are we still going to be drip-fed certain amounts of money that we won't know how much they are and we won't know when they're going to come? Or will it be a combination of both of those two things?
I think that's a difficult question for me to answer at the moment. They are still in the consultation process. So the consultation, as I said, closes on the 15th of August. The intentions from government are that the vast majority of grants would be rolled up into a single grant. There are likely to be, I think, potentially 4 exceptions to that at the moment. One is around children's, one is around homelessness. Others are still in discussion, but hopefully we're hopeful that we'll get some of the responses from that consultation probably later in October, which will give us a clearer position. But the idea from government is what they're wanting to do is provide authorities with a bit more stability and take away some of those grants which will simplify the process. The real positive from the fair funding review as well is what they're looking at doing is providing multi-year settlements, which will aid our medium-term financial planning massively, because it is that, along with council tax, are the 2 single biggest numbers that we've got in our budget, and if we've got those indications, it will help massively. But as and when things become clear in terms of the responses to the consultation, that's probably something that we can bring back here as well.
Thank you. Claire, I'm guessing you're going to contribute to that. I've got 2 other speakers coming up.
Yes, just to sort of add into that space, I think one of the things that we will also start to see is that it will be an unring-fence grant, so probably just for social care in general, rather than just adults. So we will have much more ability to be able to sort of move that around in terms of where we need it to be, in terms of the overall funding pot that hopefully we'll start to see coming through the fair funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I've got David Watts and then Councillor Scott Brown.
Thank you. I guess what I would add to that is that multi-year settlements, that we know how the formula is calculated, enables me and my team to commission better. Getting grant funding in December that has to be spent by March, you can only spend it on what's available in the market, and that's probably quite often not what we would choose to spend it on. It enables us to plan ahead and commission better services, better value, and those which are more focused around the particular needs that we have.
Thank you, David. Councillor Scott Brown.
Thank you very much. Mark's answered half my question. I was going to ask him whether we would be willing to return here when the results of that consultation are known, to give us an overview of what the results are. I guess the second half of the question is asking you, Chair, whether you would allow him to come back to this scrutiny committee and give us a report on the results of that consultation.
Very much so. Always welcome to do that. Yes, very much to come back. And I think as we look towards the end of this meeting tonight, we'll be talking about our forward plan, but there is always a welcome for colleagues to come forward and help us answer some of these questions, and most importantly get a sustainable and substantial budget. I'm sure you're happy to do that.
Yeah, what we could do, Chair, is as part of the scrutiny process, we'll focus on the funding side as well. And when we're looking at that, we can look at what the changes are that has taken place as part of that fair funding review, but it can be slightly wider than that because it can be all-encompassing on the funding side.
Thank you, Mark. Colleagues, any other questions coming forward? Sorry, Helen. Yeah, Councillor Harrison.
Sorry, just another question jumped into my head at the last minute there. So the fair funding review, is there a chance that we will see it as being unfair? That funding is stacked up elsewhere, and that because of our demographics or something, we end up actually losing out and finding ourselves in a more difficult position?
I think the narrative that's played out at the moment is that there has been some indicative modelling that's taken place. The authorities that will probably be viewing it as being unfair will probably be those within the London boroughs. Some of those have done well and some not so well. But when we look at any new funding distribution mechanism, there will be some that will fare better than others. What government will look to do as part of this is have some transitional arrangements in place so that those authorities that haven't done so well don't necessarily lose all of that grant in year one. It'll be phased over a 3-year period. And that will then give them time to adjust. But again, until all of the details are out, I mean, I think there's the latest indications where we may get some indicative figures the end of November, which would be fantastic, because what you'll all be aware of in previous years, we've got it a few days before Christmas. So if we're able to get something that then really feeds into our reporting timeline, that would be very advantageous. But as I said earlier, the biggest bit for us would be having a degree of certainty over the medium-term and multi-year settlements.
Thank you, Mark. And Claire Edwards.
Yeah, just I know it probably feels as though we're avoiding the answers to whether we get a good outcome in this. I think that the real answer is we just don't know, and it would be remiss of us to say whether it's a positive or a negative at this stage, because the consultation could change that, the outcomes in terms of what we've been modelling could change. Just to sort of give you an example, we did, you know, again, as we say, based on some of the evidence and information and historics that we work on, We've obviously looked at modelling our own information in terms of grants. We did that last year, as you'll probably recall, and we had a recovery grant that we estimated we would get 3.6 million, and the other side of that consultation we got 0. So, you know, there is a danger in that we can be wrong in terms of how we expect that funding formula to be applied, in terms of the nuances, in terms of that detail that we don't necessarily see. Or they're not being clear on, that can change how the allocation goes. So there is just a bit of a word of warning, you know, in terms of what may or may not come out of that. So we can model as much as we like and provide estimates, but the difficulty is if that shifts significantly, we would be back to the drawing board in terms of having to balance the budget again.
So, Councillor Paul Brooke. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Just to change things up slightly, how do the council plan to improve the clarity and accessibility of the financial information and scrutiny information for scrutiny for the public, so that the public can see this and understand some of what is the decisions we're making or you're making, and what we're scrutinising, etc. If you see what I mean.
Thank you, Paul.
So
Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So as by magic, we've already amended our reports and put together what's a much more visual package in terms of our Q1 reports. It still will be a work in progress, and hopefully this group will be able to help us develop that. So we've started on that journey in trying to combine our financial reports together so it's easier to read. It might be more volume in terms of paper, but hopefully what you can take from it will be quicker to understand, and you get to the key challenges, key risks, key achievements and mitigations straight away. And you can see that as Northamptonshire, and you can see that also diluted down by directorate. So if you're interested in a particular directorate, you've got a snapshot there of what they're doing, how they're performing, and a RAG rating. So you can see it very visually right from the word go. So that's starting in situ and will be filtering through in Q1. So we've already started to listen and look at what we're doing as reports and hopefully make them much more easier for residents and members to understand them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. just picking up on that particular item, therefore, would we anticipate the outturn for Q1 to be coming to our meeting on, I think it's the 26th of August, with that slightly improved revised format? Is that the plan?
Yes, Chair, it will be coming here in the revised plan.
I think we might, when we're talking to Tom Barden at the end of, when we're doing KPIs, one of the things that strikes me is that we have the in-year budget and the overspends, or however they are, or the savings that come forward. But some of these trends, for example, like home to school transport, has been over the last 4 years, and having some form of data that says, 21, 22, home to school transport was X, 22, 23, 24, and so on. Just simple graphic illustrations there, because whilst there's an ongoing trend of those, for example, home to school transport increasing within the year, it's sometimes hard looking at the data, and as you correctly point out, 132 pages of information is really, really hard, even for us to try and absorb, but certainly for the community in that way. So I think we might talk about trying to get some graphic images of those particular budgets that we all know are going to be difficult. One question I just wanted to ask, and it may be towards David, I don't know, but in terms of operator contracts that we are re-tendering, historically that's always been a very difficult aspect, hasn't it? You've got a contract for certain services. We're looking forward into, in the future, into 26, 27, how those contracts with inflation and general uplift in those contracts, how do you actually attempt to get a budget which recognises something that we really don't know in the future? I don't know who would like to answer that one, or both. Claire gets the opportunity.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I'm sure David will chip in. So obviously, all service areas work really closely with our procurement team. And like you say, we do have the historical trends to be able to understand and look at what those costs might be and extrapolate them forward. And we've also got the historical savings that we have made with those contracts. So we are working closely now that the new Procurement Act has come in as well, in looking at information. So there's certain information that we need to start publishing, and I think that's sort of something that I think this forum would be keen to look at. As probably a recommendation to sort of look at what that procurement data means and what that sort of how we can sort of ensure we prove value for money. But a lot of that's obviously within the service areas, there's knowledge of the market as well, and working quite closely with their partners and operators out there. But also what we do tend to use to ensure that we've got economies of scale is making sure we go onto frameworks, which gives us the best price, which has obviously been negotiated on a wider platform across the whole of that activity through Crown Commercial Services. So there's opportunities for us to really sort of focus on what it is we want to achieve. And as North Northamptonshire is really large in terms of scale, we can really start to sort of benefit from those economies of scale sort of going through. So we've got factual evidence in terms of contracts that we have done and what we have delivered and that have delivered savings and value for money. And obviously we'll be working quite closely with services to ensure that we can achieve that. Some of it might be around changing the way that we work and looking at different ways to operate, which might be slightly unknown. But again, you know, as we all try to do, we work with the best information that we have available to be able to predict that and put that within our budget. So again, it's going to be a bit of an unknown quantity, but again, I think with some of the history and experience that we have in our officers, we're able to obviously work quite closely with those services to obviously formulate what that budget impact might look like in terms of either an increase in budget or a reduction in negotiation of contracts. So for example, in our budget we've just did for 25-26, we had a live contract going through that process at the time, which was the waste services, and that has delivered a saving, which we put some of that into the budget, and we're now able to realign that so that you can put in the full impact of what that was that's come out of those that process. So there is really positive work that's going on out there, and I think hopefully the Procurement Act will help us to deliver some of that as well.
Thank you very much, Claire. It's an imponderable, but one we have to ponder on. David Watts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Claire, for that contribution. It's really helpful to set the scene around that. For new members, what you will probably find is that I get to bring lots of reports with very big numbers in them. And that's what Councillor Hakewill will be referring to, particularly things like our fee uplifts for social care providers. When you understand that we spend over £100 million on care support every year for people in Northamptonshire, the fee uplifts have a demonstrable impact on that every year. So let's just take 100 million as that number of we're spending on it. If we uplift our fees to social care providers by 4%, that 100 million becomes 104 million. So it's really necessary that we work very closely with our colleagues in finance to understand what might be the factors that might influence our fee uplifts. More recently, the biggest impact that we have had within our fee uplifts, above and beyond the demographic challenges and pressures that we've seen from that, has been around national living wage increases. The care sector is highly leveraged on national living wage, and a few years ago, we had a number of years where we were told what the uplifts would be and how we would get to the national living wage by year 3 of that. That enabled us to plan ahead. When those are negotiated on an annual basis, we make assumptions around that, but we're not always right. We can try and use a similar sort of methodology as to what was used for previous years. What I do have confidence in is now that we are 4 years into the new authority, we have much better trend data around Northamptonshire, because all of our previous trend data was based on Northamptonshire as a county. Now, to the layperson, you might say, well, Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire are very similar. Yes, in some ways they are, but in other ways they are very different as well. And particularly in regards to adult social care, there are a significant greater proportion in West Northamptonshire where people fund all of their care support, which meant that the county-wide trend was hiding that in Northamptonshire we have a much greater exposure to people who rely on public support to fund their care and support. But we have much better understanding of what that means to us as a local authority now. Does that mean I can tell you exactly how much we're going to spend by the end of this year? No, but it gives us a much better idea about the peaks and troughs that we may see and help us to plan earlier in the year what interventions we might be able to put in place to manage some of that demand better.
Thank you, David. Well, I think if there are no other questions coming forward, we'll draw that particular item to a close. And I think from the chair, I just recommend that for our August the 26th meeting, as we've discussed, if we could identify that easier, clearer way of presenting data. Would anyone like to just move that to go on to our next meeting? So Councillor Harrison moves that, and Raj, I'm sure you'll pick up on that. That what we want to do is to have the clearest clarity that we can be between the community and our corporate responsibilities of how we spend those budgets. And a seconder for that one for our next meeting, and Councillor Paul Brooke. Colleagues, do you have any other further recommendations that you would like to make as a result of going through this particular report? I think that's no, and a very good discussion about the challenges that we will have, always probably have had, but will have in this ensuing year. Just the last point I would make is the fairer funding review. When would we expect, after having contributed, that fairer funding review to be known to us here? That gives us some more security about budgeting. That may be a very difficult question to answer.
Sorry, yes, thank you, Chair. I think in the conversation we've already had, we've alluded to the fact that we're hoping to see stuff in October with published numbers in November, which is significantly earlier than we've seen before. So they're not normally published until sort of Christmas time. So again, we wait to ensure that that timetable will be kept to by central government.
Thank you. Thank you. So we can keep our fingers crossed that we get the data in good time for our budgeting process and our committee's deliberations on the budget.
What we'll do, Chair, as we said, during the budget process, as I said, we'll be looking at funding, so we will provide those within our funding proposals in terms of what we believe the fair funding review outcome will be. We may not have a confirmed figure, but we'll be able to provide you with our proposed estimated figure.
Thank you. Thank you. Raj, are you happy with? Yep. So we have some recommendations, he said, coming forward. On the recommendations that I'll put forward from the Chair, go along 3 lines: improved forecasting and oversight for 25-26. That we, and I'll ask for a mover and a seconder, we recommend that the Council strengthens its in-year financial forecasting by establishing early intervention protocols for high-risk budget areas and ensures quarterly monitoring reports to this committee, clearly flagging emerging pressures and mitigations. That's the first recommendation. The second is on resilience and learning for the medium-term financial plan. We recommend that insights from the 24/5 Outturn that we've just heard about are explicitly captured and used to inform updates to the medium-term financial plan, with a focus on building resilience through strategic reserves and realistic service level budgeting. And third recommendation, clarity and accessibility of financial reporting. Recommend that the future financial reports include a clearer summary of key variances, reserves movements and headline risks to improve member and public understanding and to support effective scrutiny. So those are 3 recommendations that I would move, and could we have a seconder for those 3? Councillor Ben Jameson. Thank you. Thank you, Raj. So we now move on to the draft capital outturn for 24-25, and Claire, I think that is back to you. Is that right, to introduce this report?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. So this report before the committee is the report that's been approved by Exec on the 17th of June 2025 and outlines the 24-25 outturn position for the General Fund Capital Programme and the HRA Capital Programme. So in the attached report, you will see that we have a significant capital programme outlined for the General Fund. We had a budget of £107 million, of which we have spent £50 million, and we are proposing a budget carry forward of £48 million. What I would like to say here, Appendix A also gives you an opportunity to understand what schemes have not performed or not delivered the budget and the reasons why that they've not actually delivered in year. We're working very closely with the service areas to reprofile the budgets and ensure that we learn from our activities that have happened before to improve that position. So as we mature as an organisation, we are starting to get better at phasing our budgets across those multiple years. Obviously, what you will see, and I think it's quite a significant part of our budget programme, is there's been a significant activity in items that have been funded through grants. As we'll notice, what happens when we do get grants come in, they're normally late in the day, and we have to change our activity and therefore focus on those grant deliverable programmes. So of our budget that we have seen and what we have delivered, which I think is a significant achievement in delivering £50 million in a capital investments in our local area, is that we've got £33 million of that's been delivered through grant funding, which is not insurmountable. And as you'll notice that we also have to ensure that we focus on delivering those projects before any other projects as well. Otherwise, we do lose the grant funding. So what we will see coming forward in Q1 is a proposal that will look to rephase those budgets into future years and to ensure that we don't have some of these significant underspends. But I'm sure you'll appreciate that these underspends will happen, and there'll be various reasons as to why, which we try to capture on a regular basis to keep you informed of what's happening in those proposals. Moving on to the HRA, so similarly we have quite a significant budget. We've got a revised budget in the HRA of £23 million, which we have spent by the end of the year 11 million, looking for a proposed carry forward of just over 7 million. So again, what's outlined in Appendix B is the capital programme itself and the activity that's happened, and also provides you with any explanations to those variances. So we have undertaken some significant activity and continue to look to how we can push forward, particularly in the area of developing house spending on new houses with the event of the relaxed right to buy scheme as well. So I'll pause there, I won't go through the whole report, and I'm happy to take any questions, but also then divert you back to the recommendations as set out in section 3 of the report.
Thank you, Claire. Just coming from me as chair, obviously when we have a capital programme, we are in effect promising our residents change, whether that be building or development or whatever aspects that capital goes into. When we underspend, in a sense, we are breaking that promise because we simply aren't able to deliver. Is it more internal or external factors on the capital programme that are having that influence? Because clearly over the years we've underspent on that capital programme. Is it internal or external? In what proportion?
I can't tell you the proportion split, but obviously within Appendix A and B we do provide an explanation to those variances, and it'll probably be a combination of factors. So it might be the fact it could be down to capacity, where we've had to divert resources onto a particular project because it could come forward sooner than we thought in terms of grant funding, and that might have a timeline to it, so we have to deliver it in a certain time frame. So that might have to come forward or be delivered quicker. I think also what we're trying to learn as an organisation in its maturity in terms of being realistic in those timeframes of when we can actually deliver stuff. We are ambitious and we want to deliver our capital programme, and there will be obviously external factors where we may have to deal with crested newts and things like that, which will delay activity and access to sites. So there will be a myriad of different explanations and reasons why. Hopefully what we're trying to provide you in these reports that we have in conjunction with the service areas is an explanation as to why they have happened or occurred, and hopefully give you some reassurances that we are delivering those programmes, but there may be delays that we will not have been able to manage or mitigate out. So that's really what we're trying to do, and ensure that we can flag that on a risk basis going forward.
Thank you, Claire. And David Watts.
Thank you. So particularly around the housing revenue accounts capital programme, if I can just add to that, I'm not going to dwell on great crested news, but so some of the other examples that we've got, for us to acquire properties or to develop properties, we have to make the schemes stack up financially. They have to wash their own face. And some of the increasing costs that we've seen has meant that we haven't been able to bring through some of the developments that we would have wanted to because they weren't financially viable. Additionally, throughout the pandemic period, there was a pause on our stock condition surveys. And in order to develop our capital programme for investment in our existing properties, we need to have a good understanding of the stock that we own and what the significant capital investments are needed for some of the bigger projects that we have. So, for example, kitchen replacements, windows, external wall insulation, roofs, all of those sorts of things. And we were supported by the Housing Improvement Board to invest in additional surveyors in December to enable us to increase the pace at which we were completing our stock condition surveys. So from a relatively low rate in December of we've managed to increase the number of completed stock condition surveys to over 50% now. So that gives us a really good understanding of the conditions of our stock, and it's testament to Yvonne and her team for having driven that forward. For you as members, if there was one thing that I could ask that you do is encourage our tenants, where you are working with our tenants, to accept our surveyors coming in to carry out stock condition surveys. We're not doing it for an underhand reason. We're doing it to try and build a capital programme that invests in their homes, that gives them a better home. So when you are talking to residents, because we do have some difficulties getting over the doorstep to carry out those stock condition surveys. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and I'm sure that that goes out on YouTube, as well as all of us making that point. And often residents are sceptical, aren't they, of why we might be appearing at their doorstep, but the benefits will accrue if they do let us in. Councillor Helen Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. So there's a couple of things that came out from that. One is the sort of issue around the projects continuing to be financially viable. Obviously, the longer they sit undone and unfulfilled, the more likely those costs are going to go up. So I'd be interested to know if there's been a review of the projects that are sitting in the pool that might actually now no longer be viable as a result of costs going up. And I've completely forgotten what the other thing was I was going to say. Yes, it's about the grants that come through, and so the projects that get done because we've got to use that money in a certain space of time, which means that becomes a priority, which maybe knocks something else off the agenda. It's kind of a perennial annoyance, really, isn't it, that we kind of end up at the whim of central government grants coming through, and suddenly our carefully prepared plan is thrown out the window because the grants come in. And of course, the last thing we want to do is not use that money and take another project to fruition. I'm just wondering if there's anything as a council we can do to say, right, we know, so we've got this pool of things, we've bid for this money because the money's there. We know that might come through. Is there any way of almost sort of making sure we can carry on with the programme we have, while at the same time saying, right, here's a worked up piece of work that we need to do. We've got the funding for it now. We've got to get it done in such and such a time. Can we use external people to deliver that project for us so that our nicely thought out programme can continue without being thrown off course? So sorry, there were two parts to that question. I hope it all made sense.
Thank you, Helen. I'm sure it does.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's very difficult to sort of ascertain sort of where we are in that landscape in terms of capital and whether those costs will escalate. I mean, of course they will, and we've seen significant costs increase when we had obviously the challenge around the high inflation and the cost of living. So you're quite right, the more we do delay some of our projects, the higher the costs will be. We have been trying to manage that obviously through the development pool, so we can sort of move budgets around and repurpose them as and when one project may drop off and not being required. So what opportunities do we have to sort of repurpose that budget? We are trying to build contingencies in, so we're quite live to the issue where some projects may be delayed, so we're quite consciously building in contingencies on projects that may see cost creep, so to speak, and obviously trying to ensure that we safeguard ourselves around that, but we can't obviously try to deal with everything, can try and get those delivered as much as we can. If something, we haven't had it yet, I think, come back off the the capital programme, because it's not deliverable or not affordable, we'd obviously have to relook at what we do then going forward, and whether we bring, like you say, external people in to deliver something that I think is when you've got programmes that they're just continually ongoing, it's not so much of an issue. Where I think you're doing one-offs, and I think we do have that challenge in terms of what resources and capacity we can build into the organisation. Where we're dealing with grants, it's slightly more difficult because it doesn't give us much scope to actually include people and resources in terms of what they give you. So what we'll end up having is the project or the terms of reference for the grant will not allow us to put people in it, generally speaking. We will be looking to try and do that, but I think we need to build that in terms of the overall ask. So when we start to look for the ask or bid for that grant, that we make sure we do include those resources. So I think what we've done in the past is not ask for that up front and put it in inclusive of what we're trying to deliver. So whether that resource happens to be internal or external, we've got the ability to be able to divert the appropriate resources on it. So again, as we're learning through that process, as we become more mature in terms of what they'll accept of a bid and not include in a bid. So some of it have been quite strict in what we can put in as administration costs, for example, or additional resources, and some, we could have built it in but didn't. And I think, we just need to make sure we learn from what those grants begin. But like you say, we don't always know when some grants are going to come up, so it's always a bit opportunistic in terms of the process. And obviously, it's remiss of us to not bid for some grant funding if we can get it. We're desperately trying to make sure we do follow through on all those grants and make sure we can maximise that funding from somewhere else rather than our own funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And David Watts.
Just 2 points from me. So one of them just around using external providers to try and be more efficient. So certainly within the HRA we do that. Where it makes sense, we will look at commissioning out some of the activity that we do. And at the last executive, we approved we approved the procurement of 3 external contracts around doing those sorts of activities. One example being the supply and fit of external doors and windows. On grant funding, we're also quite pragmatic where the grants give us the ability to do things in particular ways. We will do. So in my area, we have local authority housing funds. We're up to the 3rd round of that. That's capital money that comes from central government. So it makes sense for us to acquire off the open market new properties rather than developing those ourselves. And using that grant funding, that's enabled us to purchase so far 41 properties for the local authority using heavily subsidised grants. So yes, we have to match fund, but we're finding that the government grants usually equate to about 60% of the purchase price, with the council having to match around 40% of that. But clearly that then brings into our stock either in the general fund or the HRA, dependent on the conditions which are applied. Significant numbers of properties that benefit our residents in Northamptonshire.
Thank you, David. Councillor Scott Brown and then Councillor Dennis McLean.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at Appendix B, page 87 of our public agenda pack. It's the Housing Directorate. There's 16, 17 lines, 4 of which have the comment, project delayed due to procurement for contract. I'm just wondering, that's 25% of comments on that page. Is that something internal that we've got an issue with our procurement team, or are they just very different instances?
Thank you,
Claire.
Chair. No, there's no issue with the procurement team. It was just delays in trying to get all the procurement information ready and out in time for when that contract needed to start. So again, it's just around us ensuring that we manage those timelines and know when contracts are ending in order for us to be a bit more proactive in that space. So I think it's just an awareness when we've grouped contracts together coming from many different areas in terms of legacy, being aware when some of those contracts have dropped off and maybe not having all that information to hand to be a bit more proactive in that space. So there's no particular ongoing issue. I think we just experienced then I think people don't realise how long procurement can take, and being then up front, because it's not a quick thing that can be turned around within the legislation. So again, it's just us making sure that we've got all the information to hand to be a bit more proactive in that space. So the contract's been done now, and it's all active and up running. So again, it's just making sure that we have all those lines of communication within all the service areas and the support team to help them deliver that in a timely manner.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor Dennis McLean. Dennis.
Yeah, this is just a follow-on from Helen's question, and for David, I think it is. When we look at capital spending as far as the housing goes, we're looking at new builds and refurbishing stock that we've already got?
It's a combination, Councillor. So yes, there will be some new builds. A significant number of our capital investments are set out in Appendix B, which give you a good idea. So a lot of it is doing work on our 8,000 plus existing homes to do the cyclical investment that's required to keep the homes in good order. We also acquire from the used market as well. So our acquisitions team monitor what's available in the used market, and where we feel that there are properties that would benefit some of the needs that we have, or that there are potentially good positive investments for us to have as a council, we may look at acquiring those properties as well. So we have done that fairly recently around apartments to support with our temporary accommodation needs that we have for particular smaller groups and single occupancy.
Just to follow up on that, as far as the repairs go to the housing stock itself, this is anecdotal. It's one of my constituents who had put in for certain things to be repaired in their home, and he's in Kettering, and the guy came out from Corby and he did an assessment of the home, and he said, I'm surprised that this work hasn't been done because it's all been done in Corby. And they did another assessment. I mean, it's simple things like the front back door. It's just stuff that's worn out over the years. How are we able to sort of accelerate these programs in any way?
So I think from the perspective of what you are having described to you, there have previously been two different approaches because of the legacy arrangements from the previous councils. We've done a significant amount of work to harmonise those programmes of work and get consistency across there, but it will take time for that to move through to the experience of all our tenants in that sense. I think in particular what we are keen to do, so we have to develop and refresh our 30-year business plan, which will give us a good indication of the activity that we need to undertake and over what period of time. What you have described is not capital expenditure, so general maintenance and repairs has to come from our revenue, HRA revenue, due to the nature of it. We can only use capital funds to invest in large refurbishment programmes.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Dennis. Your questions. Colleagues, any other questions coming forward? Councillor Ben Jameson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to address a couple of questions regarding delays. Are there any specific measures we can take in improving project timelines so we can try and avoid delays? And then in terms of delayed projects such as education and housing, are we still meeting our strategic priorities, or is the delaying impacting their relevance? Thank you.
David, thank you. David Watts.
So we complete lessons learned reports after all of our big capital programmes to try and understand, did we get our planning right around it? Did we get the budgets right, contingencies, etc., to try and make sure that any of our future programmes are not hit by the same challenges. There's a variety of things which may impact on that. So if Yvonne was up here, she would talk about having quite a significant gap in the next tier of senior managers below her for a significant period of time, which did impact on our ability to drive forward some of those projects in the way that we want to. But what we are doing through Yvonne's restructure of the service is building greater resilience into the teams which deliver on things like acquisitions, but also significant development programmes as well.
Thank you, David.
I think that was all your questions, was it?
It was just obviously delays.
Sorry, Ben, could you, your mic? Sorry.
And also other delays affecting like the priorities of the council.
In relation to the connection to the corporate plan?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that. I think the corporate plan sets out an ambition that you will achieve over a significant period of time. I think what you will find is it will always be moving on. Where there are delays built in, we will look to try and mitigate them as soon as possible. But our plans, from the council's perspective about having great homes, families being supported to live great lives, remain exactly the same. I think the deliverability of any public sector priorities are challenging at the moment, and they probably, I think I can probably speak for most of the corporate leadership team, are the most challenging which they have been for most of our careers in that sense. However, we have dedicated teams that work to try and deliver despite those challenges rather than because of them.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Ben. Colleagues, any other questions on the capital programme? Just a question from myself. When you look at the development pool and the projects that are in the development pool, is it reasonable to suggest that some of the projects in the actual capital programme should really be sitting in the development pool, which would not make it look quite so much of a shortfall on delivery, the conversation we've just had? Would it make more sense to put some of those projects into the development pool? Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's always the difficult challenge that we have in understanding when to put them in the development pool, when to put them in the capital programme. So with best intentions, obviously we work very closely with all the service areas when we do our budgets, which obviously you'll see firsthand coming through this committee, in terms of how we set out the capital programme, what our ambitions are, what's aligned to the corporate plan, and so on. And I think it's difficult. Obviously, we do keep some big projects, as you'll see in the development pool, that aren't live, but we know are going through a process and could come off and into the capital programme at some point. But again, as I said, we are looking to reprofile some of these capital programmes, and some of them will probably go back into the development pool. So it is a constant question that we do ask, and we do obviously ask service areas and to support and provide us with that information so we can challenge and obviously move stuff around and recommend to executive what needs to be in the capital programme, what doesn't. So it's still a challenge. We still have a number of projects that are still winding down in terms of what was started by the legacy authorities, and some things that we just need to ensure that we just take off. And I think we're getting to that point where we now know we don't need to do this, or it's not happening. We can repurpose some of the budgets and redo that. So what we're trying to do is also consolidate. A lot of the projects that we've got in here is too many in terms of lines and activities. So we are trying to make it much more easier for members and residents to understand what the different projects are by consolidating them. They're all sort of similar. So we've not got 20, 30 or 50 different lines of activities. And it's much more easier to understand what those projects are trying to do under the global there's a consolidated heading. So there's a lot of work going on in the background to try and make it much more meaningful, making sure that we do have things in the right places in the right financial year. And again, it's still a challenge is one of the biggest things I'll probably say. We're getting better, but there's still a lot of work for us to do in terms of making sure we get those profiles nailed with the service areas.
Thank you. And just to come back on that, some of those legacy projects, I know in the early days of our new council, there were quite a lot of legacy projects that were perhaps, should one say, undeliverable. Are they now I think I might have heard you say that already, but are they now coming out of the system where they're just not viable and shouldn't be in a programme anyway?
Yeah, so we may have probably a handful left that we're just sort of making sure that as contracts, as we're starting to change the way we work. So, for example, there's still one in here that's a live contract in terms of the waste contract for East Northampton, so that's now coming back in-house. So there is something on the capital programme which we may or may not need, but until we understand exactly what's coming back as part of that contract, we can't actually take it off the programme. But what we will then understand once those contracts are back in place and in-house, we'll be able to make a much more better informed decision. So it's around refuge vehicles. So what will they be looking like? Do we need to replace them? Or is there a wider programme of fleet that we need to be understanding? So they're the sort of answers that we're trying to sort of work our way through. And as that will happen, it will then challenge and change the capital programme as we go through that process in terms of what our options might be. So until we know that, we've kept it on the capital programme just because we know it's a live contract and there will be a requirement for us to replace vehicles at some point.
I think the general theme there, colleagues, is that after 4 years of, I wouldn't say necessarily stability, but at least we're now being more predictable on those sort of contracts and removing some of the unknowns from the past, which is really important. Colleagues, we are now on our recommendations for this particular item, and the recommendation is, although my personal feeling is we should never be noting any items, but 3.1, note the outturn 24-25 as outlined in the report, Appendix A. And the second part of that, colleagues, are there any items that have come through today in that debate where we might like to recommend further scrutiny of this committee, or indeed to pass it on to another committee? Colleagues, I just ask you there if there are any particular items in that capital programme that you would like to see come back. Clearly you'll have an opportunity in the future to do that. Perhaps not at this particular time. So that concludes item draft capital outturn. And I think, I'm not sure whether the recommendations, whether we'll put those forward or not. I think we've probably discussed them through. So as colleagues haven't brought forward any particular items to scrutinise, I think we will move forward. So once again, thank you Claire and David in particular for the contribution there. So we now go on to item 8, which is Key Performance Indicator Report. Now, Claire, that has your name against it again. Is that down to you, or you're certainly going to, I'm sure, delegate to colleagues? So item 8, Key Performance Indicator Report, period 12.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm kindly going to hand over to my colleague, Tom.
So, Tom Barden, thank you very much. Thank you for being patient to go through those last items. So, over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. As Raj said at the beginning, one of the areas this committee looks at is corporate performance. When I say corporate performance, I mean the whole process of setting expectations, measuring what's happening, and acting to improve services for the whole council. We tend to look at these reports, these scorecards, and they are static and they're really quite dry. But performance management is quite an active process that's undertaken within all of our directorates, within our teams. We're in a process of thinking what they're going to do, planning, measuring, monitoring what's happening, changing to make sure that it's matching up with their expectations, and then moving forward. So although we look at these long reports, we should think of it as something which is happening all the way across the council. Financial management, absolutely the same. So this report, just in the same way as the financial report was we talked about earlier, show us performance as measured by our key performance indicators in March 2025. The key performance indicators are grouped into 3 areas. That's because the council is a very large, complicated business, and we have very many services from child protection to licensing to swimming pools, and they are all important to somebody. So we have to keep an eye on the performance of all of those different services, and in order to try to make that a bit more accessible for people, they are grouped into three different areas in Appendix A, B and C in the reports that you've got. Appendix A is focused on a monthly report which is focused on our core indicators. There's 35 indicators in there, and those indicators are the things which are measuring the activity in some of our most high-profile and well-known services, like streetlights and potholes and adult admissions into adult social care. Appendix B is our quarterly report covering a much wider and deeper range of services. So there's a further 80 indicators that's contained in that quarterly service key performance indicators report. And Appendix C is focused on our organisational health. So that's things about our workforce, about our complaints response times, about the way that we're interacting with customers and residents, which show us about how healthy our organisation is as a whole, rather than just about our services and the people and what people are accessing. In our overall set, at this point up to the end of March, for those indicators where we've got a target that's set and where data is available, 62% were on or exceeding target. 19% were what we call within tolerance. You'll also hear that as amber in the red, amber, green rating. That means near target, usually within 10% or so. And 23% were below target, which you'll hear as described as being red. At 4.3 in the report, there's quite a lot more detail about areas of high and low performance, covering all of the different areas of the council, if you want to go and have a look at that. But that is still quite extensive, because in this report we're covering the whole core indicators and the service indicators and the organisational health indicators. Ordinary variation of performance from one period to the next also means that sometimes indicators will overperform and underperform and overperform and move along, tipping along between meeting target and being off target. So sometimes that's difficult to pick out trends. So at 5.2, indicators that were reported as red, i.e. off target, throughout the last financial year have been collected together, and I've highlighted those. Broadly speaking, those fall into areas of education, especially in SEND, business rates collection, homelessness prevention, the percentage of complaints that we've answered in timescale, and sickness absence amongst our workforce. All of those areas were off target last year. Those indicators that are mentioned there don't tell us the whole story. The way we get the most value out of key performance indicators is we use them as tin openers to help us to understand which areas do we need to look, do we need to find some more context, find some more information, and pinpoint where there is a performance issue that we can address and how we might go about addressing that. So I would very much encourage in those indicators for members of the committee to go and have a look at the commentary and understand some of the context. But the committee may also wish to consider whether these areas are worthy of further investigation through either a dedicated scrutiny process or through referral to another committee. Just finally on the information from that's in this report. So these reports are prepared and published quarterly, along with the same timescales as the financial information, and they'll be brought here alongside the finance monitoring report. In the upcoming Q1 report, we will be introducing clearer scorecards than you see in here. So what we've done is taken some of the columns out, so that they're not quite as enormous. They look good on A3 paper. That's not something everybody has to print out. So we've reduced that down, and that should be more accessible for the Q1 period. In Q2, we'll be introducing more graphical information into the same report as within the finance report, so that you can look at the financial information and the key performance indicators in the monthly core set, the most important set, together, not quite on the same page, but certainly next to one another. So I think we are trying to make some progress in terms of improving the accessibility of the performance reporting at the same time at the moment, but really would welcome views on how we can make that more accessible. There is some contextual information already contained within the scorecards. So there's last year's performance against each indicator, and there's also that detailed commentary to have a look at as well. So I know they are overwhelming, but hopefully I've provided a couple of signposts to support members to interrogate them and use them in the process of scrutiny. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Colleagues, any comments there? Councillor Helen Harrison.
Thanks, Tom, for that report. That's really helpful. I really like the way you set that out, because for people who have not looked at these before, I think that would have been really useful. And I think it was important, the context of these not being static figures. They're, managing this performance is an active process, and we should. I like the idea of this being. We should open the lid on the tin and have a look inside to find out what's going on. Now, clearly, that is an active process that the council works on corporately, and we've got some indicators here that are really sticky in red, struggling along. And continuing to stay red rag rated. So you already mentioned some of them, like homelessness prevention and EHC reviews and so on. But you will also have instances where you'll have seen some really good improvement, maybe of some previously sticky, difficult areas where the performance was struggling but has now improved. And I'm guessing that from a performance management point of view, you learn lessons from, even if areas are very, very different, what did we do to get that moving, and how did we get that working well? So my question is, for going back to the sticky ones that are persistently red, what are we doing at the moment to get under the skin of those and learn from other areas and really try to bring the performance of those up? And I do realise that some of it's going to be very much demand is going to be an issue, but even with demand, what are we doing to really try to improve? And I'll stick with homelessness prevention and the EHC plan reviews. Thanks.
Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. So you're absolutely right, Councillor, that we do learn a lot from those sticky indicators the other way. Thinking about planning timescales, for example, has improved quite a lot over the last year, and are now steadily above target, or slightly bumping along there. So I think there are good examples of where performance has improved. In terms of what we do to support those areas, then it will be different in every single case, because the underlying issue around performance might be different in different areas. On homelessness, I'll defer to David, who I'm sure will have a bit more update specifically on there. But just to pick up on the example around education healthcare plans. So the work in terms of the performance management there diagnosed that the process and the way that the system was interacting with that process was offering a lot of challenges and making it difficult to run that process in a more slick way. We knew that the contract for replacing the system was coming up, and so there was an opportunity there to be addressing that particular issue within the context of the replacement of the case management system. So that work's going on now. The process was reviewed and rebuilt in the new system and tied to be much more fit for purpose for the way that we want to work now, and that's being implemented at the moment. So I think that in a sense, there is a little bit that's opportunistic about how we address performance issues. In the sense, we need to see where the opportunities are and grab them as they go by, and use every opportunity we can to look at those underlying reasons. But we maintain the consistency with the performance management framework, by consistently looking at indicators, by applying a fair and even-handed treatment across all of the different areas to help identify which services are popping up at the moment.
Yes,
so just a follow-up question then. So that was an interesting case to look at. And really what you're talking about is the sort of tech behind the scenes. So difficult to manage, difficult to work, and presumably slowing things down because of that. And I know that I know that in all sorts of different areas there will be instances where case management is difficult because of old-fashioned or clunky software and things that we're using. Is there ever an argument for taking a piece of software that we're using that we still have a contract for, and say, we might have 2 years still to go, rather than waiting for 2 years because it's slowing things down, it's making things difficult, it means we're not delivering for people in Northamptonshire. Is there ever an argument for getting out of something sooner? I know there would always be a cost to that, and getting the right case management in much earlier rather than just waiting.
Saying is there sometimes potentially yes. I suppose I wouldn't want to give a fair answer. Oh no, definitely not, or always. I would say depending on the circumstances, yes, there might be. There are most of the case management systems that we purchase for the biggest services are actually very customizable, and so as processes and practice develops, then we can build the workflow which is in the system to make sure that we continue to fit the practice and that stays fit for purpose. And that's the way that we think about when we're planning and managing and implementing case management systems, is that we plan for those things to change. I mean, there are lots of reasons why those things would happen. Sometimes government introduces new legislation and we need to change something in the system. Sometimes actually a transformation project or a change in the way that we manage the service and the practice model actually also encourages us to change. And then each time when you get to the end of that contract, that's an opportunity for a much bigger change. The last thing I'd say is that it's valuable to be able to do that because the costs and the resources required to change from one system to the next are very significant, and they involve retraining people. It would involve potentially new and different IT kit, so it's actually a significant effort to migrate data from one system to the other. So it's not something you want to be doing often if you can possibly avoid it.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Helen. Now, David, is yours in follow-up to that? Because Councillor Brown wants to come in as well. So would that be all right, Scott, if I bring David in? David first and then Scott.
Hopefully I can help with two bits. So there was Tom said I might be able to help with some of the homelessness performance indicators. So I'll come to that second. Just on the contract side of things and whether there's value in exiting them earlier. Some of our systems are very complicated and the data integrity which is within it is extremely important. So it can take around 2 years for us to implement a new system to the point where you can stop using the other system. So even within the life cycle of a contract, you can find that actually you're only halfway through the contract and it's almost too late to do that piece of work to move on to a new system. However, you'll be pleased to know that that isn't the case with the adult social care system, which during your tenure was coming towards the end of that contract. So we are in a process of recommissioning that. On the homelessness indicators, I always find that rather than reading these individually, it's better to read them together. So you've got a number of indicators on page 105, so AFL 13, 14, 17 and 12. I don't know why they don't run in order. I'm sure Tom will be able to explain it to me. But, so we have numbers of households whose homelessness was prevented. We have, it can be sometimes difficult to say whether a polarity is good or bad on that. So on this one, we say, well, it's better if the number of households whose homelessness was prevented is higher. But that means more people are potentially approaching us because of homelessness, which isn't a good thing. Number of households whose homelessness was relieved, if I read that in conjunction with the one above, then it makes sense to me that actually the two are related. So when you can see that actually we are having to relieve lower numbers of people's homelessness rather than prevent it, and read in conjunction with a lower number of people that have been prevented, then it makes sense that actually our performance is better when you combine the two, if that makes sense. And it's probably something around presentation, but these are difficult things to try and present in that sense. And finally, on the rough sleepers in Northamptonshire, the sensitivity of that indicator is, it can swing from one month to another, because the numbers of people that are rough sleeping in Northamptonshire are in the low double figures. So at our best performance so far this year, 9, currently at 14, been as high as 18, our target being 9, but tolerance being 12. It doesn't take much to tip us over into being red from amber or green, because you only need a couple of extra people to be counted on the nights where we do our rough sleeper counts, to be present, to be counted in that sense. So that's a highly volatile indicator that is influenced by a very small number of people. So again, it's about understanding the impact which small changes can have in particular with that one. But I like to read those two around prevention and relieving homelessness together, because that gives you a much better understanding of, are we having to relieve more people's homelessness because we're not doing something around preventing homelessness? But when you read them together, if prevention is lower, but actually our performance around relieving is still good, then I feel that indicates that we're doing things well.
Yes, entirely understand. And Tom's going to tell us how he's going to present that better in the future. Tom.
No, I think I was going to say, I think that's what David's just said is a really, really good example of the balance between being systematic, so that we can say we've applied this rule systematically and fairly to the whole, the corporate, in order that we can say we've got discipline, we've got rigour, we've got scrutiny, but then actually an awful lot turns on the details of the particular situation for that particular service, as David has just illustrated really, really well. So I do think that's why it's important for in this report that the committee considers areas to look at and uses the performance indicators in order to guide inquiry rather than as the end of the inquiry, if you see what I mean.
Thank you, Tom. Colleagues, part of our conclusion on this is whether or not we have any particular items that we would like to bring forward to greater scrutiny. But first of all, actually, just one thing. We're now heading towards 2056. I would hope that maybe another 10 or 15 minutes, but could I just have a show of hands to extend the guillotine, which falls at 9 o'clock, a little longer? That seems to be unanimous. Scott, you now have time. Sorry, Jane.
Apologies, Chair, I will have to leave at 9.
No problem at all.
Apologies for that.
Yeah. If there's anything you wanted to incorporate before you go, absolutely. Thank you. That's Jane Bethia.
With regards to the KPIs, what benchmarking is done with other councils, especially similar councils to ours, and what is the mechanism for reaching out to those councils who may be performing quite well in areas that we're not performing so well? How does that work, or does it work?
does. I'm
Tom and Dave. Tom and David.
To make a start on that one. There should be there's benchmarking within the report, which you should be able to see on one of the columns as to whether that indicator is benchmarked. There are several different ways of creating groups of councils that we might want to be comparing ourselves to. So we want to compare to all unitary councils in sometimes. We will want to compare ourselves to other councils that are in our geographical region in the East Midlands sometimes, and we will also want to compare ourselves to similar councils, so with similar groups of demographics, similar economies, perhaps a similar size, same kinds of services. So those are usually called statistical neighbours, and there are several different groupings of those statistical neighbours depending on the services that you are interested in benchmarking. The one which is used in the most generic way is produced by CIPFA, which is the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accountants. I got there. And they produce a very standard set which is used in by government and by the LGA. So in our CIPFA Stat Neighbours set, there is we have other unitaries which have similar demographics and similar economies. In terms of the data where the indicators that are benchmarked comes from, then there are several indicators which are generated from data we return as part of our annual statutory returns, or in fact for some services more frequently than that. And that's where we submit data to government about the activity going on within that service. So we've picked on adult social care a lot today, but I'm going to pick on adult social care again. They have a lot of statutory returns to do, including a quarterly client level data set that's now. So every quarter we send information to government for about every single person who's accessed adult social care services, which services they've accessed, some demographic details about them, and some dates about when they were assessed and were accessing those services. And from that, we can generate indicators which are created on a standard methodology for all councils with social services responsibilities. And from that, then we can generate benchmarked values, so we know where are we in comparison to the average for other similar councils. A lot of that information is supported and used by local networks between different services. So we are the member of a benchmarking network for adult social care in the East Midlands, and every local authority will submit their standard data and some extra data that perhaps has been locally agreed into that network, and then there can be a conversation about where are the performance differences, which councils are doing well, and then there are often then follow-ups. And that applies. I picked adult social care again as an example, but I think that's within almost every professional sector of the services that we run as councils.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Tom. Colleagues, sorry, David. Apologies, David. What?
Thank you. Just in addition to what Tom has explained there, which is, again, fully agree with, in the benchmark column, always do read the age of the data which is being used. So whilst we do a quarterly return, and it's only it's a fairly new return, it used to be an annual return. And what you can find is that your data, your performance changes significantly in comparison to the benchmark when it was the prior year. Mainly due to things like demographic growth, but also performance in that sense. So on some of these indicators, you are comparing yourself to your benchmark comparators for their performance for the previous year, not as newer data in that sense, which is part of the reason why we do use things like our regional networks, where we can obtain more recent data to help us understand our performance. The problem that we do have with that is it's not, quite often we find that there may only be one other council in the region that is considered to be our like-for-like type of comparator. So there's no point comparing what we do in Northamptonshire to Leicester City or Derby City or Nottingham City in that sense, but they form part of our region for the information which we gather in that sense.
And always beneficial to have those benchmarks, but totally understand what you're saying there is that it's got to be a like for like and in either direction, whether it presses us to improve or we're already there. We need to interpret that data. Very, very complex process and a great deal of data and information in front of us tonight. And I think between now and the next week or two, we can perhaps talk informally as a committee about what particular data we want to come forward, what things we want to scrutinise next time, but very much look forward to the, how can I say, rebranding of that data, because it's going to be crucial to us to be able to assist the executive in moving forward with this next year's budget, 26-27. So are there any particular items coming out of that latest report on that data, any particular issues that colleagues, councillors want to bring forward for more detailed scrutiny at this point anyway? I sense not from that point of view. No problem. So that takes us to item number 9, which is the corporate scrutiny work plan. And this is our plan. Today has been, or this evening has been very much opening up the discussion, building confidences between us, and clearly that will evolve over time. But right now, over to Raj in terms of the corporate scrutiny work plan.
Thank you, Chair. So looking at the corporate scrutiny work plan, we'll see that there's quite a few annual reports and regular reports that come to the committee. So that's everything we've had tonight around revenue and outturn, and things such as the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman Annual Report, the KPI set and updated performance management framework, annual budget scrutiny, the corporate plan, the resident survey, and so on. So as always, these items will go to the Scrutiny Management Board to be allocated to meetings of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee. If members have any particular items of interest that they'd like the committee to consider, these can be raised through the Scrutiny Management Board, and then they will be added to the work plan. So if there are anything that members would like to raise today, we will then take that to the next meeting of the Scrutiny Management Board to be allocated to a meeting on the work plan. So I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Raj. Any particular items to go on to the forward plan? Councillor Harrison, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. I think at the very beginning of the meeting we were asking a bit about the efficiency review and how we would get to see the progress of that piece of work. And I know some of it would come forward as large items for us to have a look at. I wonder if that could be put as something to be considered as an item for our agenda in the future.
There's a general agreement on that, that we would like to see that. So one of our future committees, which is probably the efficiency review, is August, September, isn't it? So it goes into October. I believe we have a meeting in October. So I guess we can word it easily, the outcomes of the executive-led efficiency review. I was tempted to say highlights, but whichever they are, notable issues coming from the efficiency review to go on to the forward plan. And Claire?
My only caution on that is that we're trying to ensure that that comes to you as part of the budget process anyway. So it's whether it's a separate item or whether we were going to parcel it up as part and parcel of the budget process. So the outcomes would be included as any efficiencies as part of our budget proposals.
Helen, did you want to come back? Thank you, Claire.
So I think, given that this was brought to the executive, the very first item that came to the executive of this year, This, yeah. And it was given some weight there as an innovative and new thing that this council was doing. I might have questioned whether... Anyway, no, don't go there. It seems like something that we ought to review, because if it's something that's, you know, if it's something that brings a lot out and it's really useful and it's very helpful, then, you know, maybe it's something that should be revisited periodically as something the council should do, as an exercise, not necessarily every year, because if you did every year, it would be just business as usual. So I'm just wondering if it should come as a separate item so that we can get an idea of this very important process that was introduced as sort of new and innovative and over and above what is normally done by the council in terms of looking for efficiencies. I think it'd be good for us to see the results of that separately.
So picking up the gist of that, I'll summarise in a moment, Claire.
Yes, I suppose we can do that. It's just a question of whether it's duplicating the same outcome, but we can obviously have a discussion around that. Happy for it to go onto your forward plan with in mind that we will produce something separately, or we can flag it within the budget information that we provide where it's, you know, in terms that it's as a result of the efficiency review. You know, maybe there's something we can do on that, so you're seeing the same information and we're not duplicating it, but we can take that offline in terms of what it looks like.
Yeah, I would suggest on our forward plan we've got performance monitoring and review, annual budget scrutiny, and I think the answer there is informed by the key findings of the efficiency review. And in a report, even it's a bit semantic, if it's in the same report or two separate reports, doesn't really matter, but informed by the outcomes of the efficiency review. Does that sound enough? And we can nestle it into the annual budget scrutiny. Colleagues, look around the room. I've got one other thing, which is the corporate plan. I could see Guy there looking quite enthusiastic at 9:10 in the evening, having sat there and listened to us. So we heard the corporate plan refresh and the consultation, which I think is now still ongoing or closed. I'll tell you what, it'd be easier if I just asked Guy that I think we would like that on the forward plan, if you've got anything to contribute to that and how we phase it in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was waiting for the opportunity, but I wanted to give members the opportunity to say their piece first of all. For clarification, the consultation on the resident satisfaction survey has now closed. That is relevant because on the timeline, the proposal was to bring the corporate plan to corporate scrutiny in October, which fits in quite nicely from when the consultation on the corporate plan would finish. So the information from the consultation on the corporate plan, along with the results of the resident satisfaction survey, would also be ready, which could feed into the scrutiny of the draft corporate plan and still provide some time to shape the plan ready for endorsement, exec and adoption by full council. So obviously subject to Scrutiny Management Board and members here, I would suggest that it comes to the October and probably also is accompanied by the resident satisfaction survey results as well, if members have got the appetite for those to be reported together.
Thank you, Guy. That's Guy Holloway. Equally, so we will put that onto the forward plan, Scrutiny Management Board, the bureaucratic process that goes through. And just gauging around colleagues in the room for any other items on the forward plan that are obvious at this point. And I think that probably concludes that. But just coming back to yourself, Guy, perhaps just lay down the concept of how, in budget scrutiny, we may engage the community more fully. You know, however that is, we have the traditional. It goes out on the internet and so on, those type of processes. But whether or not within resources and within the energy and desires of the executive to actually get out and about in Northamptonshire to find opportunities, literally to meet people and explain what our budget is doing. So that's probably not a forward plan, but I just wanted to hook that in there because we're talking about resident satisfaction and so on. So I hope that we can work on that and involve more people, those people who want to be involved. Claire.
Yeah, just to come back on that, so it's something that we have been grappling with over the last number of years in terms of how we do increase that engagement and what platforms we can use. So there's been various conversations with CLT as well in terms of how we can sort of move that engagement forward and what line of inquiry we can use and open up in terms of our comms out to the wider residents. And now with the new administration, it's obviously trying to look at way we can sort of, I think it's more around myth busting around the sort of, I think you were alluding to, understanding the information is what we're trying to focus on. So then for the engagement into that budget process hopefully will be greater. So it's what can we do in advance of the budget process to also, explain what some of this stuff is, how we utilise our money, how important it is. And I think the resident surveys guys alluded to will help us sort of focus in terms of people who want to engage with us in certain ways, and hopefully we can explore different mediums of how we can put that information across. So there's many ways we do it, and I would say our rate of success is limited by those who actually want to talk to us and actually want to listen to us and come and have a conversation. So, I think with the resident survey, we've got a bit of an open door that we can sort of bounce into. And have that sort of wider conversation around how we, demystify the budget process and demystify some of that language that's used in that space too when we do get into that budget space. And hopefully what we start to see come out of the monitoring reports that we're trying to sort of break down and have a much more open pictorial way of displaying our information will hopefully lead us into a much more understandable budget report as well. So it's going to follow the same sort of format. It's still obviously a work in progress, which hopefully you'll see when it comes in Q1, and you can hopefully be a part of what the direction that changes. But, working with Guy's team, we're trying to explore all the different ways and means that we can sort of hopefully utilise, like you say, with our new members, how they can get out there and help promote and engage with residents about getting involved with the budget and having their say.
Yeah, absolutely that. I visualise corporate scrutiny on the road with the executive or something like that. We'll find opportunities that I just wanted to place that in because I think it's one of the things that local government generally doesn't do that well, given that our residents have to pay their council tax. They have no choice to do that. But trying to, and I think as we close the meeting, because we're now at the last part of it, I think the word demystify should be ringing in our ears as we drive home and think about how we will go through that budget scrutiny. So thank you very much, all the officer colleagues that have come along, the councillor colleagues that have come along. This evening has been a lot of learning, really, because a lot of us are new to scrutiny and how we're going to make our place in that. And it wouldn't go without me lastly saying that we now have 204 days, 3 hours and 43 minutes before we set the council tax. So with that note, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for the contributions, and I therefore close the meeting.